Hi ladies, today we are talking about section 2-9, which is scientific notation. Now you've probably heard of this before, or once I show you, you'll be like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. But scientific notation is just a way to write a really big number or a really small number in a shorter way. It's almost like a shortcut, okay? Now look at these numbers that I have. I have 5,430 million. That's my first number. That has a lot of zeros on it, right? And so to write that number out like that takes a lot of space. And scientific notation is a way for us to write this number in a shorter form. So my goal with scientific notation is to make my number between 1 and 10. So I'm going to have to put a decimal in this number, okay? And I don't know what color pen I have right now. Red, okay, good. So what I'm gonna do is I'm always gonna put my decimal right here, right after the first number, whatever my first actual number is that's not a zero. That's where my decimal is gonna go. Because now I have the number 5.43. And I'm not going to write the zeros. I don't need those anymore. But just write all the numbers that are not zero. So 5.43, you're always going to have some number, point, and then something else. And then I'm going to use my scientific notation, which is times 10 to the something power. So I'm going to use an exponent on my 10. And the exponent on my 10 is going to be the number of spaces that I moved my decimal over. So remember, there's always an imaginary decimal sitting right here at the end of a number. If there's not a decimal in the number, there's an imaginary one on the end. So I'm going to start there and count how many spaces I moved to put that decimal between the 5 and the 4. So 1, 2, 3, and you're only hopping over the zeros or the numbers, okay? Ignore the comma when you do this part. That was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I had to move the decimal 9 places, so that means my exponent is going to be 9. Now here's a trick with the exponents. When you write scientific notation, your exponent is either going to be positive or negative. If you start with a really large number, your exponent is going to be positive. That's a really big plus sign. Let me write that differently. Your exponent's going to be positive. And if you start with a really small number, like this decimal over here, your exponent is going to be negative. All right, so let's keep those two signs in mind. Big number, positive exponent. Small number is going to be a negative exponent. All right, so again, I want to make a number between 1 and 10. That means I'm going to have to put my decimal right here so that I have 7.2, because 7.2 is between 1 and 10 on the number line, and that's what I want. Then I'm going to write my times 10. Now I have to figure out my exponent. Well, remember, since I started with a teeny tiny decimal this time, and I know it's a teeny tiny decimal because it's a decimal with a bunch of zeros after it, my exponent's going to be negative. And now I'm just going to count how many times did I move that decimal point to get to my new location. So it started here, and I moved it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times. And each little hoop that you make should have a number sitting in it. That's how I'm counting. Every little hoop has a 0 in it or has a 7 in it. Okay? All right, so those are 2 examples. This may seem a little confusing still, but don't worry, because the more examples that we do together, I think the clearer it's going to become. So write this in your math journal, and then we'll come back and do a couple examples. Okay, here's some examples from page 106. And remember, you're still learning, so just walk through this with me and it'll make more sense when we're done. So just as a reminder, if I have a big number, I'm going to have a positive exponent. And if I have a small number, like a decimal, I'm going to have a negative exponent. All right, so I'm going to write that down there to help us remember. And let's go. So in this first one, it says, write each number in standard form. So right now, what you see is scientific notation, and standard form would be writing the number out long without the times 10 to the exponent, okay? So I'm going to write the 732, and I notice that I have a positive exponent. So that means I have to make a large number. That means the zeros are going to be on the end of this number. So I'm going to start where my decimal was, and I'm going to hop 4 places. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's where my new decimal goes. And any empty hoops that are sitting there are going to get filled in with zeros. So my new number becomes 73,200. Okay, and you notice I no longer have a decimal right here because I got rid of it. Make sure you don't have the decimal in 2 places. It can only be in 1 place. All right, so the next one, again, it's a positive exponent, so I'm going to make a big number. So I'm going to write my number down, and then I'm going to start where the decimal was and hop 5 places this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's where my new decimal goes. Fill in the empty hoops with zeros. So my new number becomes 993,100. Okay, let's keep going. So now I have a negative exponent. That means my decimal is going to go the other way this time. It's going to make a smaller number. So I'm going to write my number down, and then right where that decimal was, I'm going to move the opposite way 1 time because it's to the -1 power. That's where my new decimal goes, and I'm just going to put that 0 in front because they like to write decimals with a 0 in front, okay? So again, let's check. Up here, I have a large number and a positive exponent. Down here, I have a small number, because it's a decimal, with a negative exponent, okay? All right, let's go on the last one. Again, write the number down, 602. I have a negative exponent, so I'm going to be moving to the left to make it even smaller number. Start right where that decimal was and hop 4 places. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's where my new decimal goes. Fill in any empty hoops with zeros. And I'm going to put a 0 in front. You don't have to put the 0 in front, but you can. Okay, so that becomes my new number, 0.000602. That's a lot of zeros. All right, copy these down in your math journal, and I will be right back. Okay, so for these last 4 examples, it says write each number in scientific notation. So now we have standard form. I have to change it over to scientific notation. Remember, if I start with a large number, a big number, I'm going to have a positive exponent. And if I start with a small number, like these little decimals down here, I'm going to have a negative exponent. So I'm just going to write those there to remind myself, okay? And again, I want to make a number that's between 1 and 10. That's how I decide where to put my decimal. So I'm going to put my decimal right here. And I'm going to rewrite the number without all the zeros. but with the decimal that I just added. Put my times 10, and now I need an exponent. So positive exponent, because I started with a big number, and I'm going to count from where my decimal started, my imaginary decimal on the end right there. I'm going to count how many hops to my new location. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hopped 5 times. Okay? Again, number 9. Let's put the decimal between the first two numbers that are not 0. That way I make a number between 1 and 10. 8.785 is between 1 and 10. Write my times 10, big number, positive exponent, and count how many hops from where the decimal originally started on the end. So it started right there, so let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 8.785 times 10 to the 9th power. Okay. All right, let's do the small decimals. So this time, every time I have my scientific notation, I'm going to have a negative exponent. So let's figure out how to write these numbers. Okay, so you want to make a number between 1 and 10. So put that decimal between the first two numbers that are not zeros. Rewrite the number without all the zeros. And then let's count the spaces or the hops from the original decimal to the new decimal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's a negative 5 because it's a small number. Let's do the same thing over here. Again, put the decimal between the first two numbers that are not 0 to make a number between 1 and 10. 5.24. Now count how many hops we moved the decimal for the exponent. 1. And that was a hard one, right? We moved it 1 time. Okay? So, big number, positive exponent, small number, negative exponent. Don't worry if this is still a little fuzzy or confusing because we're going to keep practicing for the next several days, and it will get easier and easier the more examples that we do. Okay? All right, let me know if you have any questions, and I will put an example video in the IXL assignment in case you need some help with the IXL. Okay? I'll see you next time. Bye!